What's important is that you and I begin to imagine what heaven looks like. Everybody wonders what happens when we die. All of us. If there is one person in the building that has never once considered where you're going when you die, would you raise your hand so we can set up a meeting for counseling? Everybody wonders. It's a universal theme. Now, I know there's a God. I am convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, have I ever seen Him? No, but I have met you. And I know that God is a part of you. And I'll tell you, God couldn't possibly have made a mistake when He made my wife. He couldn't possibly have made a mistake when He made my children. There is a God. And He loves you greatly. Something happens. Something happens in this world, and all of us die. Not some of us, not a few of us, not the unlucky ones. All of us die. I think of the joke that John Burke tells. He says 3 guys were playing poker one night, and they asked each other, "What do you want said at your funeral?" Now, one says he'd like the world to know that he was a brilliant doctor and that he saved many lives. The other says, "I wanted people to know that I was a devoted and loving father and husband." And the other says, "I want him to say, look, he's moving." 13 million Americans. 13 million Americans is the number of people who have had near-death experiences in this country, who have died. Some of them actually have their own death certificates, have died, and then told their story. Now, that's a big number. And I don't believe it's by accident. I don't believe it's a topic we can just rush past and ignore. I believe it's something we need to dig into. Ask some questions. Ask some holy questions, and even a few unholy ones. Like, what kind of shoes were you wearing? There are a lot of common things that happen in these near-death experiences. There are several authors who have authored books about near-death experiences. One of them we're going to hear from is Dr. Mary, last name is Neal. She's the one in that whitewater rafting video who was pinned under the water and was dead. I think in this journey together, we're going to see incredible evidence that heaven is real. And I think that if you are a Christian, I hope you see how real it really is. Today we start with an overview. We'd like to paint you a picture of what the evidence is of the afterlife. I want to invite you to be skeptical. I want you to be skeptical of any one story. But as you hear stories that all have commonality, I would like you to begin the tough process of opening your mind and imagining exactly how incredible God could be. How wonderful He could open up the world to us. One of the things that John's tried to do in his book is to find the common elements across over 1,000 stories. And what our prayer is that as you begin to imagine heaven, that it will change you just as it changes those who have experienced a near-death experience. There are several people that he quotes in the book, and he quotes in his sermon, and I'd like to quote some of those for you. Cardiologist Dr. Michael Sambom, S-A-M-B-O-M, describes what changed his mind. Before talking with Pete and scores like him, he says, I didn't believe there was such a thing as a near-death experience. Pete, is this patient of his, told me that he had left his body during his first cardiac arrest and had watched the resuscitation from somewhere else. When I asked him to tell me what exactly he saw, he describes the resuscitation with such detail and accuracy that I could have later used the tape to teach physicians how to bring people back to life. These people, like Pete Morton, saw details of their resuscitation that they could not otherwise have seen. One patient noticed the physician who failed to wear his scuffs over his white shoes. You know those green booty things they put on you? Over his patent leather shoes during an open heart surgery. In many cases, I was able to confirm the patient's testimony with medical records and with the hospital staff. Talking with Dr. Sabom, said that he had studied near-death experiences for the simple reason of refuting them. It's the only reason he got into studying them. He said, I want to see if it would pass scientific muster, and it did. After 5 years of research, he published his findings in the book called Recollections of Death. He also published his findings in the Journal of American Medical Association. A radiation oncologist, Dr. Long, read his findings in the American Medical Association. Found it hard to believe until one night at dinner with a friend, Sheila, his friend, mentions a food allergy that made her code once, and her heart stopped. Dr. Long decided to probe. Did anything happen to you when you coded? Hesitantly, quietly, as is with most people who have had a near-death experience, she said, yes, I found myself at ceiling level. I could see the EKG machine I was hooked to. The EKG was flatlined. The doctors and nurses were frantically trying to bring me back to life. The scene below me was a near-panic situation. In contrast to the chaos below, I felt a proud sense of peace. I was completely free of any pain. My consciousness drifted out of the operating room and moved into a nursing station. I immediately recognized that this was a nursing station on the floor where I had been prior to my surgery. From my vantage point near the ceiling, I saw the nurses bustling about, performing their daily duties. After I watched the nurses a while, a tunnel opened up. I was drawn to the tunnel. I then passed through the tunnel and became aware of a bright light at the end of the tunnel. I felt peaceful. After I passed through the tunnel, I found myself in an area of beauty, mystical light. In front of me were several of my beloved relatives who had previously died. It was a joyous reunion, and we embraced. I found myself with a mystical being of overwhelming love and compassion. And then he asked, do you want to go back? She responded, I don't know. Which is just like a normal, old, incisive self at the time. But after further discussion, she knew the choice to return from a physical body was hers. It was a most difficult decision. She said she was in a realm of overwhelming love, and in this realm, she knew she was truly home. Finally, she returned to her body, woke in the ICU over a day later, had tubes and wires all over her. She says, I could not talk about my profound experience. Since then, Dr. Long has collected and scientifically studied thousands of accounts from around the world, some of which we're going to explore in this book, Imagine Heaven. This is his conclusion. By studying thousands of detailed accounts of near-death experiences, I found the evidence that led to this astounding conclusion. Near-death experiences provide such powerful scientific evidence that it is reasonable to accept the existence of an afterlife. Folks, this is someone who is not a Christian. This is someone whose reputation is on the line. Dr. J.M. Holden, a professor of psychology, studied 93 near-death experience patients who claimed to make verifiable observations while out of their bodies. Of these out-of-body perceptions, 92% were completely accurate, verifiable. They seen things that were correct. 6% contained some errors. And only 1% was completely erroneous, obviously fabricated. When you die, you leave this body behind. But you are still you, in a new spiritual body. Science tells us that single skin cell of your body dies and gets replaced every 2 weeks. You're not the same body this month as you were last month. So whatever you are is not just physical. That's what the Bible has told us for thousands of years. The Apostle Paul was a Jewish Pharisee who was killing Christians. You remember the story well? Until the moment he sees the light. On the Damascus Road, the blinding light, which very well could have been a near-death experience. We don't know the details of it. He realized in that moment that Jesus was who he claimed to be. But seeing is not always believing. Paul still had to decide if he would follow Jesus, which is true of most near-death experiences. They still have a choice to make. Paul goes on to start churches across the Roman Empire. In Acts 14, it appears Paul may have had a near-death experience when he got stoned to death. We read about this just a few weeks ago. It says they stoned Paul, they drug him out of town thinking he was dead, but as the believers gathered around him, he got up, went back to the town. Acts 14, 19 through 20. Listen to what Paul says later. I can go back to that slide for you. Some of you will be able to read it, some of you won't. It's okay, I'll read it to you. I was caught up to the third heaven 14 years ago. Whether I was in my body or out of my body, I don't know. Only God knows. But I do know that I was caught up to paradise and heard things so astounding that they cannot be expressed in words. Things no human is allowed to tell. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 2 through 4, Paul later explains, when we die, we get new bodies. An upgrade, version 2.0 is how the Message version reads it. Our bodies are buried in brokenness, but they will be raised in glory. They're buried in weakness, but they will be raised in strength. They're buried as natural human bodies, but they will be raised as spiritual bodies. 1 Corinthians 15, 43 through 44. We will explore more about our bodies next week. But we will be ourselves. In fact, you will be more yourself than ever, more alive than ever.